Local production currently supplies only about 15% of Puerto Rico's total food demand. Experts estimate that even with full crop capability, the island could at best meet 30% of local needs. Today, over 80 to 85% of food consumed is imported, mostly from the continental United States. The food and beverage category makes up roughly 10% of Puerto Rico's total goods imports by value. Agriculture contributes only 0.6 to 0.8% of Puerto Rico's GDP, approximately $800 million in 2020. Less than 2% of the workforce is employed in agriculture today. Just 6% of the island's land is arable. In 1940, approximately 45% of Puerto Ricans worked in agriculture. In the 1950s, with Operation Bootstrap, a major shift toward industrialization and away from farming began. Post-World War II to 2019, the workforce share dropped dramatically, reaching less than 2% by 2019. The food production index fell from a 1966 peak of approximately 254 down to approximately 95 by 2022, marking a sustained decline. By 2017, agriculture made up less than 1% of GDP, consuming even greater import dependency. Puerto Rico never completely stopped farming, but its capacity and scale have collapsed since the mid-20th century. The decline began in the 1950s, with most farming subsumed by industrial development and economic policies favoring imports. Today, despite fertile land and a favorable climate, import dependence remains entrenched. Approximately 85% of food is imported. Agriculture contributes under 1% of GDP, and only a tiny fraction of the population works in farming. Recently, there's been a movement toward food sovereignty, with initiatives like LDAPA and others fostering agroecology and small-scale farming. But the structural shift away from agriculture has been ongoing for over 70 years, and rebuilding remains an uphill battle. Metric value. Local food production is approximately 15% of consumption. Food import dependency is approximately 80 to 85% of consumption. Agriculture's share of GDP is 0.6 to 0.8%, or $800 million in 2020. Workforce in agriculture is less than 2%. Arable land percentage is approximately 6%. Peak workforce in agriculture in 1940 was approximately 45%. The industrial shift began in the 1950s with Operation Bootstrap. Bottom line, while Puerto Rico still produces food, the industrial pivot in the 1950s dramatically reduced its agricultural capacity. Today, approximately 85% of food is imported, only 15% produced locally, with agriculture contributing under 1% of GDP and employing less than 2% of the workforce. The transition away from a farming-based economy started over 70 years ago, and rebuilding local food systems is still underway. If Puerto Rico were to generate 80 to 90% of its own food, the island would experience significant economic, social, and strategic benefits. Let's break it down into two categories: internal self-sufficiency and external exports. Generating 80 to 90% of its own food could first strengthen food security. It reduces dependence on United States and foreign imports, protects against supply chain disruptions like hurricanes or shipping delays, and cuts long-distance transport, reducing spoilage and costs. Second, it could create thousands of jobs. Reviving agriculture would create 50,000 to 100,000 jobs, especially in rural areas, and support roles like processing, packaging, marketing, logistics, and agri-tech. So let's talk about some more benefits to the island. Improving the trade balance is a big one. Puerto Rico, spends between $2 and $3 billion every year on imported food. If we could produce, say, 80 to 90% of that food locally, about $1.5 to $2.5 billion would stay circulating inside our own economy. Another thing, supporting local businesses. This shift would really boost small farmers, cooperatives, and local food entrepreneurs. Restaurants, schools, and hospitals could all buy fresh local produce, which is just awesome for everybody. Assuming Puerto Rico grows more than it consumes, so beyond that 80 to 90% self-sufficiency level, the surplus could be exported, opening up new economic opportunities. We could export high-demand products like tropical fruits, mangoes, pineapples, guavas, and of course coffee, which is a high-value export. Puerto Rican coffee once rivaled Colombia's, plus cacao, plantains, yams, specialty peppers, and artisan food products could all find markets overseas. Now, let's look at the economic impact. If exports reach something like $500 million to $1 billion every year, this could really diversify the economy. We'd be less dependent on pharma and manufacturing, attract more foreign investment and trade partnerships, and boost rural development, especially through farming cooperatives. And when it comes to global market access, being part of the U.S. Customs Zone means Puerto Rican exports can enter U.S. markets tariff-free. There's also the potential to access global markets if we leverage trade agreements, for example, with Europe, Latin America, or the Caribbean. So what does a realistic vision look like? If we reach 80 to 90% local production, that's about $1.5 to $2.5 billion kept on the island. Add up to $1 billion in exports, and you're looking at a total economic impact of $2.5 to $3.5 billion annually. And jobs, that could mean 50,000 to 100,000 in local food production, plus over 10,000 in logistics and export. So anywhere from 60,000 to 110,000 jobs created. But yeah, there are challenges to all this. We'd need to rebuild agricultural infrastructure, train and retain a new generation of farmers, provide government subsidies, and improve land access, and invest in water and irrigation systems, not to mention building climate resilience. If Puerto Rico could produce 80 to 90% of its food and export the surplus, it would really reclaim food sovereignty, stimulate rural economies, create jobs, and position itself as a key Caribbean agricultural hub, much like Costa Rica or the Dominican Republic. Like this content? Please subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for your support. See you soon.